Chapter 4. The Seven Potters. Harry ran back upstairs to his bedroom, arriving at the window just in time to see the Dursleys' car swinging out of the drive and off up the road. Daedalus' top hat was visible between Aunt Petunia and Dudley in the back seat. The car turned right at the end of Privet Drive. Its windows burned scarlet for a moment in the now setting sun, and then it was gone. Harry picked up Hedwig's cage, his firebolt, and his rucksack, gave his unnaturally tidy bedroom one last sweeping look, and then made his ungainly way back downstairs to the hall, where he deposited cage, broomstick, and bag near the foot of the stairs. The light was fading rapidly now, the hall full of shadows in the evening light. It felt most strange to stand here in the silence and know that he was about to leave the house for the last time. Long ago, when he had been left alone while the Dursleys went out to enjoy themselves, the hours of solitude had been a rare treat. Pausing only to sneak something tasty from the fridge, he had rushed upstairs to play on Dudley's computer, or put on the television and flick through the channels to his heart's content. It gave him an odd, empty feeling to remember those times. It was like remembering a younger brother whom he had lost. "Don't you want to take one last look at the place?" he asked Hedwig, who was still sulking with her head under her wing. "We'll never be here again. Don't you want to remember all the good times? I mean, look at this doormat. What memories. Dudley puked on it after I saved him from the Dementors. Turns out he was grateful after all. Can you believe it? And last summer, Dumbledore walked through that front door." Harry lost the thread of his thoughts for a moment, and Hedwig did nothing to help him retrieve it, but continued to sit with her head under her wing. Harry turned his back on the front door. "And under here, Hedwig," Harry pulled open a door under the stairs, "is where I used to sleep. You never knew me then. Blimey, it is small. I'd forgotten." Harry looked around at the stacked shoes and umbrellas, remembering how he used to wake every morning, looking up at the underside of the staircase, which was more often than not adorned with a spouter or two. Those had been the days before he had known anything about his true identity, before he had found out how his parents had died, or why such strange things often happened around him. But Harry could still remember the dreams that had dogged him, even in those days. Confused dreams involving flashes of green light. And once, Uncle Vernon had nearly crashed the car when Harry had recounted it. A flying motorbike. There was a sudden deafening roar from somewhere nearby. Harry straightened up with a jerk and smacked the top of his head on the low door frame. Pausing only to employ a few of Uncle Vernon's choicest swear words, he staggered back into the kitchen, clutching his head and staring out of the window into the back garden. The darkness seemed to be rippling, the air itself quivering. Then, one by one, figures began to pop into sight as their disillusionment charms lifted. Dominating the scene was Hagrid, wearing a helmet and goggles, and sitting astride an enormous motorbike with a black sidecar attached. All around him, other people were dismounting from brooms, and, in 2 cases, skeletal black-winged horses. Wrenching open the back door, Harry hurtled into their midst. There was a general cry of greeting as Hermione flung her arms around him, Ron clapped him on the back, and Hagrid said, "All right, Harry, ready for the off?" "Definitely," said Harry, beaming around at all of them. "But I wasn't expecting this many of you." "Change of plan," growled Mad-Eye, who was holding 2 enormous bulging sacks, and whose magical eye was spinning from darkening sky to house to garden with dizzying rapidity. "Let's get under cover before we talk you through it." Harry led them all back into the kitchen where, laughing and chattering, they settled on chairs, sat themselves upon Aunt Petunia's gleaming work surfaces, or leaned up against her spotless appliances. Ron, long and lanky, Hermione, with her bushy hair tied back in a long plait, Fred and George grinning identically, Bill, badly scarred and long-haired, Mr. Weasley, kind-faced, balding, his spectacles a little awry, Mad-Eye, battle-worn, one-legged, his bright blue magical eye whizzing in its socket, Tonks, whose short hair was her favorite shade of bright pink, Lupin, grayer, more lined, Fleur, slender and beautiful, with her long silvery blonde hair, Kingsley, bald, black, broad-shouldered, Hagrid with his wild hair and beard standing hunchbacked to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling, and Mundungus Fletcher, small, dirty, and hangdog, with his droopy basset hound eyes and matted hair. Harry's heart seemed to expand and glow at the sight. He felt incredibly fond of them all, even Mundungus, whom he had tried to strangle the last time they had met. "Kingsley, I thought you were looking after the Muggle Prime Minister," he called across the room. "He can get along without me for one night," said Kingsley. "You're more important." "Harry, guess what?" said Tonks from her perch on top of the washing machine, and she wiggled her left hand at him. A ring glittered there. You got married? Harry yelped, looking from her to Lupin. I'm sorry you couldn't be there, Harry. It was very quiet. That's brilliant! All right. We have time for cozy catch-up later, roared Moody over the hubbub, and silence fell in the kitchen. Moody dropped his sacks at his feet and turned to Harry. As Daedalus probably told you, we had to abandon Plan A. Pious Thickness has gone over, which gives us a big problem. He's made it an imprisonable offense to connect this house to the Flu Network, place a port key here, or operate in or out. All done in the name of your protection to prevent you-know-who getting you in. Absolutely pointless, seeing as your mother's charm does that already. What he's really done is to stop you getting out of here safely. Second problem, you're underage, which means you've still got the trace on you. The trace, said Mad-Eye impatiently. The charm that detects magical activity around under 17s. The way the Ministry finds out about underage magic. If you or anyone around you casts a spell to get you out of here, Thickness is going to know about it. And so will the Death Eaters. We can't wait for the trace to break, because the moment you turn 17, you'll lose all the protection your mother gave you. In short, Pious Thickness thinks he's got you cornered good and proper. Harry could not help but agree with the unknown Thickness. So, what are we going to do? We're going to use the only means of transport left to us. The only ones the trace can't detect, because we don't need to cast spells to use them. Rooms, Thestrals, and Hagrid's motorbike. Harry could see flaws in this plan, however he held his tongue to give Mad-Eye the chance to address them. Now, your mother's charm will only break under 2 conditions. When you come of age, or... Moody gestured around the pristine kitchen. You no longer call this place home. You and your aunt and uncle are going your separate ways tonight, in the full understanding that you're never going to live together again. Correct? Harry nodded. So this time, when you leave here, there'll be no going back, and the charm will break the moment you get outside its range. We're choosing to break it early, because the alternative is waiting for you-know-who to come and seize you the moment you turn 17. The one thing we've got on our side is that you-know-who doesn't know we're moving you tonight. We've leaked a fake trail to the Ministry. They think you're not leaving until the 30th. However, this is you-know-who we're dealing with, so we can't just rely on him getting the date wrong. He's bound to have a couple of Death Eaters patrolling the skies in this general area, just in case. So, we've given a dozen different houses every protection we can throw at them. They all look like they could be the place we're going to hide you. They've all got some connection with the Order. My house, Kingsley's place, Motley's anti-murals, you get the idea. Yeah, said Harry, not entirely truthfully because he could still spot a gaping hole in the plan. You'll be going to Tonks's parents. Once you're within the boundaries of the protective enchantments we've put on their house, you'll be able to use a port key to the burrow. Any questions? Yes, said Harry. Maybe they won't know which of the 12 secure houses I'm heading for at first, but won't it be sort of obvious once... He performed a quick head count. 14 of us fly off towards Tonks's parents? Ah, said Moody. I forgot to mention the key point. 14 of us won't be flying to Tonks's parents. There will be 7 Harry Potters moving through the skies tonight, each of them with a companion, each pair heading for a different safe house. From inside his cloak, Moody now withdrew a flask of what looked like mud. There was no need for him to say another word. Harry understood the rest of the plan immediately. No, he said loudly, his voice ringing through the kitchen. No way! I told them you'd take it like this, said Hermione with a hint of complacency. If you think I'm going to let 6 people risk their lives... Because it's the first time for all of us, said Ron. This is different, pretending to be me. Well, none of us really fancy it, Harry, said Fred earnestly. Imagine if something went wrong and we were stuck as a specky, scrawny git forever. Harry did not smile. You can't do it if I don't cooperate. You need me to give you some hair. Well, that's the plan scuppered, said George. Obviously, there's no chance at all of us getting a bit of your hair unless you cooperate. Yeah, 13 of us against one bloke who's not allowed to use magic. We've got no chance, said Fred. Funny, said Harry. Really amusing. If it has to come to force, then it will, growled Moody, his magical eye now quivering a little in its socket as he glared at Harry. Everyone here's overage Potter, and they're all prepared to take the risk. Mundungus shrugged and grimaced. The magical eye swerved sideways to glare at him out of the side of Moody's head. Let's have no more arguments. Time's wearing on. I want a few of your hairs, boy. Now.
This is mad. There's no need. No need, snarled Moody. With you know who out there and half the ministry on his side, Potter. If we're lucky, he'll have swallowed the fake bait and he'll be planning to ambush you on the 30th. But he'd be mad not to have a Death Eater or two out keeping an eye. It's what I do. They might not be able to get at you or this house while your mother's charm holds, but it's about to break, and they know the rough position of the place. Our only chance is to use decoys. Even you-know-who can't split himself into 7.
Harry caught Hermione's eye and looked away at once.
So, Potter, some of your hair, if you please.
Harry glanced at Ron, who grimaced at him in a just-do-it sort of way.
Now!
Barked Moody. With all of their eyes upon him, Harry reached up to the top of his head, grabbed a hank of hair, and pulled.
Good,
said Moody, limping forward as he pulled the stopper out of the flask of potion.
Straight in here, if you please.
Harry dropped the hair into the mud-like liquid. The moment it made contact with its surface, the potion began to froth and smoke. Then all at once, it turned clear, bright gold. "Oh, you look much tastier than Crabbe and Goyle, Harry," said Hermione, before catching sight of Ron's raised eyebrows, blushing slightly and saying, "Oh, you know what I mean. Goyle's potion looked like bogies."
"Right then, fake Potters line up over here, please," said Moody.
Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, and Fleur lined up in front of Aunt Petunia's gleaming sink. "We are one short," said Lupin.
"Here,"
said Hagrid gruffly as he lifted Mundungus by the scruff of the neck and dropped him down beside Fleur, who wrinkled her nose pointedly and moved along to stand between Fred and George instead.
"I told you I'd sooner be a protector,"
said Mundungus.
"Shut it," growled Moody. "As I've already told you, you spineless worm. Any Death Eaters we run into will be aiming to capture Potter, not kill him. Dumbledore always said you-know-who would want to finish Potter in person. It'll be the protectors who have got the most to worry about. The Death Eaters will want to kill them."
Mundungus did not look particularly reassured, but Moody was already pulling half a dozen egg-cup-sized glasses from inside his cloak, which he handed out before pouring a little polyjuice potion into each one.
"All together, then."
Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, Fleur, and Mundungus drank. All of them gasped and grimaced as the potion hit their throats. At once their features began to bubble and distort like hot wax. Hermione and Mundungus were shooting upwards. Ron, Fred, and George were shrinking. Their hair was darkening. Hermione's and Fleur's appearing to shoot backward into their skulls. Moody, quite unconcerned, was now loosening the ties of the large sacks he had brought with them. When he straightened up again, there were 6 Harry Potters, gasping and panting, in front of him. Fred and George turned to each other and said together, "Wow, we're identical!" "I don't know, though. I think I'm still better looking," said Fred, examining his reflection in the kettle. "Bah!" said Fleur, checking herself in the microwave door. "Bill, don't look at me. I'm hideous."
"Those whose clothes are a bit roomy have got smaller here," said Moody, indicating the first sack, "and vice versa. Don't forget the glasses. There's 6 pairs in the side pocket, and when you're dressed, there's luggage in the other sack."
The real Harry thought that this might just be the most bizarre thing he had ever seen, and he had seen some extremely odd things. He watched as his 6 doppelgangers rummaged in the sacks, pulling out sets of clothes, putting on glasses, stuffing their own things away. He felt like asking them to show a little more respect for his privacy as they all began stripping off with impunity, clearly much more at ease with displaying his body than they would have been with their own. "I knew Ginny was lying about that tattoo," said Ron, looking down at his bare chest. "Harry, your eyesight really is awful," said Hermione as she put on glasses. Once dressed, the fake Harrys took rucksacks and owl cages, each containing a stuffed snowy owl from the second sack. "Good," said Moody, as at last 7 dressed, bespectacled, and luggage-laden Harrys faced him. "The pairs will be as follows. Mundungus will be travelling with me by broom." "Why am I going with you?" grunted the Harry nearest the back door. "Because you're the one that needs watching," growled Moody, and sure enough, his magical eye did not waver from Mundungus as he continued. "Arthur and Fred." "I'm George," said the twin at whom Moody was pointing. "Can't you even tell us apart when we're Harry?" "Sorry, George." "I'm only yanking your wand. I am Fred, really." "Enough messing around," snarled Moody. "The other one, George or Fred, whoever you are, you're with Remus. Miss Delacour?" "I'm taking Fleur on a thestral," said Bill. "She's not that fond of brooms." Fleur walked over to stand beside him, giving a soppy, slavish look that Harry hoped with all his heart would never appear on his face again. "Miss Granger with Kingsley, again, by thestral." Hermione looked reassured as she answered Kingsley's smile. Harry knew that Hermione, too, lacked confidence on a broomstick. Which leaves you and me, Ron, said Tonks brightly, knocking over a mug tree as she waved at him. Ron did not look quite as pleased as Hermione.
And you're with me, Harry. That all right? Said Hagrid, looking a little anxious. We'll be on the bike. Brooms and thestrals can't take me weight, see? Not a lot of room in the seat with me on it, though, so you'll be in the sidecar.
That's great, said Harry, not altogether truthfully.
We think the Death Eaters will expect you to be on a broom,
said Moody, who seemed to guess how Harry was feeling.
Snape's had plenty of time to tell them everything about you he's never mentioned before. So if we do run into any Death Eaters, we're betting they'll choose one of the Potters who will look at home on a broomstick. All right, then,
he went on, tying up the sack with the fake Potter's clothes in it and leading the way to the back door.
I make it 3 minutes until we're supposed to leave. No point locking the back door. It won't keep the Death Eaters out when they come looking. Come on.
Harry hurried into the hall to fetch his rucksack, firebolt, and Hedwig's cage before joining the others in the dark back garden. On every side, broomsticks were leaping into hands. Hermione had already been helped up onto a great black thestral by Kingsley, Fleur onto the other by Bill. Hagrid was standing ready beside the motorbike, goggles on. Is this it? Is this Sirius's bike?
The very same, said Hagrid, beaming down at Harry. And the last time you was on it, Harry, I could fit you in one hand.
Harry could not help but feel a little humiliated as he got into the sidecar. It placed him several feet below everybody else. Ron smirked at the sight of him sitting there like a child in a bumper car. Harry stuffed his rucksack and broomstick down by his feet and rammed Hedwig's cage between his knees. It was extremely uncomfortable.
Arthur's done a bit of tinkering,
said Hagrid, quite oblivious to Harry's discomfort. He settled himself astride the motorcycle, which creaked slightly and sank inches into the ground.
It's got a few tricks up its handlebars now. That one was my idea.
He pointed a thick finger at a purple button near the speedometer. Please be careful, Hagrid, said Mr. Weasley, who was standing beside them, holding his broomstick. I'm still not sure that was advisable, and it's certainly only to be used in emergencies.
All right, then, said Moody. Everyone ready, please? I want us all to leave at exactly the same time, or the whole point of the diversion is lost.
Everybody mounted their brooms. Hold tight now, Ron, said Tonks, and Harry saw Ron throw a furtive, guilty look at Lupin before placing his hands on either side of her waist. Hagrid kicked the motorbike into life. It roared like a dragon, and the sidecar began to vibrate.
Good luck, everyone, shouted Moody. See you all in about an hour at the Burrow. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3!
There was a great roar from the motorbike, and Harry felt the sidecar give a nasty lurch. He was rising through the air fast, his eyes watering slightly, hair whipped back off his face. Around him, brooms were soaring upward too. The long black tail of a thestral flicked past. His legs, jammed into the sidecar by Hedwig's cage, and his rucksack were already sore and starting to go numb. So great was his discomfort that he almost forgot to take a last glimpse of number 4 Privet Drive. By the time he looked over the edge of the sidecar, he could no longer tell which one it was. Higher and higher they climbed into the sky. And then, out of nowhere, out of nothing, they were surrounded. At least 30 hooded figures, suspended in midair, formed a vast circle in the midst of which the Order members had risen oblivious. Screams! A blaze of green light on every side! Hagrid gave a yell and the motorbike rolled over. Harry lost any sense of where they were. Streetlights above him, yells around him. He was clinging to the sidecar for dear life. Hedwig's cage, the firebolt, and his rucksack slipped from beneath his knees. No, Hedwig! The broomstick spun to the earth, but he just managed to seize the strap of his rucksack and the top of the cage as the motorbike swung the right way up again. A second's relief, and then another burst of green light. The owl screeched and fell to the floor of the cage. No! No! The motorbike zoomed forward. Harry glimpsed hooded Death Eaters scattering as Hagrid blasted through their circle. Hedwig! Hedwig! But the owl lay motionless and pathetic as a toy on the floor of her cage. He could not take it in, and his terror for the others was paramount. He glanced over his shoulder and saw a mass of people moving, flares of green light. 2 pairs of people on brooms soaring off into the distance, but he could not tell who they were. Hagrid, we've got to go back! We've got to go back! He yelled over the thunderous roar of the engine, pulling out his wand, ramming Hedwig's cage onto the floor, refusing to believe that she was dead. Hagrid, turn around!
My job's to get you there safe, Harry!
Bellowed Hagrid, and he opened the throttle. Stop! Stop! Harry shouted, but as he looked back again, 2 jets of green light flew past his left ear. 4 Death Eaters had broken away from the circle and were pursuing them, aiming for Hagrid's broad back. Hagrid swerved, but the Death Eaters were keeping up with the bike. More curses shot after them, and Harry had to sink low into the sidecar to avoid them. Wriggling around, he cried, Stupefy! and a red bolt of light shot from his own wand, cleaving a gap between the 4 pursuing Death Eaters as they scattered to avoid it.
"Hold on, Harry! This'll do it for him!"
roared Hagrid, and Harry looked up just in time to see Hagrid slamming a thick finger into a green button near the fuel gauge. A wall, a solid brick wall, erupted out of the exhaust pipe. Craning his neck, Harry saw it expand into being in midair. 3 of the Death Eaters swerved and avoided it, but the 4th was not so lucky. He vanished from view and then dropped like a boulder from behind it, his broomstick broken into pieces. One of his fellows slowed up to save him, but they and the airborne wall were swallowed by darkness as Hagrid leaned low over the handlebars and sped up. More killing curses flew past Harry's head from the 2 remaining Death Eaters' wands. They were aiming for Hagrid. Harry responded with further stunning spells. Red and green collided in midair in a shower of multicolored sparks, and Harry thought wildly of fireworks and the muggles below who would have no idea what was happening.
"Here we go again, Harry! Hold on!"
yelled Hagrid, and he jabbed at a second button. This time a great net burst from the bike's exhaust, but the Death Eaters were ready for it. Not only did they swerve to avoid it, but the companion who had slowed to save their unconscious friend had caught up. He bloomed suddenly out of the darkness, and now 3 of them were pursuing the motorbike, all shooting curses after it.
"This'll do it, Harry! Hold on tight!"
yelled Hagrid, and Harry saw him slam his whole hand onto the purple button beside the speedometer. With an unmistakable bellowing roar, dragon fire burst from the exhaust, white hot and blue, and the motorbike shot forward like a bullet with a sound of wrenching metal. Harry saw the Death Eaters swerve out of sight to avoid the deadly trail of flame, and at the same time felt the sidecar sway ominously. Its metal connections to the bike had splintered with the force of acceleration.
"It's all right, Harry!"
bellowed Hagrid, now thrown flat into his back by the surge of speed. Nobody was steering now, and the sidecar was starting to twist violently in the bike's slipstream.
"I'm on it, Harry! Don't worry!"
Hagrid yelled, and from inside his jacket pocket he pulled his flowery pink umbrella. "Hagrid, no! Let me!"
"Reparo!"
There was a deafening bang, and the sidecar broke away from the bike completely. Harry sped forward, propelled by the impetus of the bike's flight. Then the sidecar began to lose height. In desperation, Harry pointed his wand at the sidecar and shouted, "Wingardium Leviosa!" The sidecar rose like a cork, unsteerable but at least still airborne. But he had a split second's relief, however, as more curses streaked past him. The 3 Death Eaters were closing in.
"I'm coming, Harry!"
Hagrid yelled up from out of the darkness, but Harry could feel the sidecar beginning to sink again. Crouching as low as he could, he pointed at the middle of the oncoming figures and yelled, "Impedimenta!" The jinx hit the middle Death Eater in the chest. For a moment, the man was absurdly spread-eagled in midair, as though he had hit an invisible barrier. One of his fellows almost collided with him. Then the sidecar began to fall in earnest, and the remaining Death Eater shot a curse so close to Harry that he had to duck below the rim of the car, knocking out a tooth on the edge of his seat.
"I'm coming, Harry! I'm coming!"
A huge hand seized the back of Harry's robes and hoisted him out of the plummeting sidecar. Harry pulled his rucksack with him as he dragged himself onto the motorbike seat and found himself back to back with Hagrid. As they soared upward, away from the 2 remaining Death Eaters, Harry spat blood out of his mouth, pointing his wand at this falling sidecar, and yelled, "Confrincho!" He knew a dreadful, gut-wrenching pang for Hedwig as it exploded. The Death Eater nearest it was blasted off his broom and fell from sight. His companion fell back and vanished.
"Harry, I'm sorry, moaned Hagrid. "I shouldn't have tried to repair it myself. You've got in a room."
"It's not a problem, just keep flying," Harry shouted back as 2 more Death Eaters emerged out of the darkness, drawing closer. As the curses came shooting across the intervening space again, Hagrid swerved and zigzagged. Harry knew that Hagrid did not dare use the Dragonfire button again, with Harry seated so insecurely. Harry sent a stunning spell after stunning spell back at their pursuers, barely holding them off. He shot another blocking jinx at them. The closest Death Eater swerved to avoid it, and his hood slipped. And by the red light of his next stunning spell, Harry saw the strangely blank face of Stanley Shunpike. Stan. "Expelliarmus!" Harry yelled.
"That's him! It's him! It's the real one!"
The hooded Death Eater's shout reached Harry even above the thunder of the motorbike's engine. Next moment, both pursuers had fallen back and disappeared from view.
"Harry, what's happened?"
bellowed Hagrid.
"Where have they gone?"
"I don't know." But Harry was afraid. The hooded Death Eater had shouted, "It's the real one." How had he known? He gazed around at the apparently empty darkness and felt its menace. Where were they? He clambered around on the seat to face forward and seized hold of the back of Hagrid's jacket. "Hagrid, do the Dragonfire thing again. Let's get out of here."
"Hold on tight then, Harry."
There was a deafening, screeching roar again, and the white-blue fire shot from the exhaust. Harry felt himself slipping backward off what little seat he had. Hagrid flung backward upon him, barely maintaining his grip on the handlebars.
I think we've lost him, Harry! I think we've done it!"
yelled Hagrid. But Harry was not convinced. Fear lapped at him as he looked left and right for pursuers he was sure would come. Why had they fallen back? One of them still had a wand. It's him. It's the real one. They had said it right after he had tried to disarm Stan.
"We're nearly there, Harry! We've nearly made it!"
shouted Hagrid. Harry felt the bike drop a little, though the lights down on the ground still seemed remote as stars. Then the scar on his forehead burned like fire as a Death Eater appeared on either side of the bike. 2 killing curses missed Harry by millimeters, cast from behind. And then Harry saw him. Voldemort was flying like smoke on the wind, without broomstick or thestral to hold him, his snake-like face gleaming out of the blackness, his white fingers raising his wand again. Hagrid let out a bellow of fear and steered the motorbike into a vertical dive. Clinging on for dear life, Harry sent stunning spells, flying at random into the whirling night. He saw a body fly past him and knew he had hit one of them, but then he heard a bang and saw sparks flying from the engine, and the motorbike spiraled through the air, completely out of control. Green jets of light shot past them again. Harry had no idea which way was up, which was down. His scar was still burning. He expected to die at any second. A hooded figure on a broomstick was feet from him. He saw it raise its arm. "No!" With a shout of fury, Hagrid launched himself off the bike at the Death Eater, and to his horror, Harry saw both Hagrid and the Death Eater falling out of sight, their combined weight too much for the broomstick. Barely gripping the plummeting bike with his knees, Harry heard Voldemort scream, "Mine!" It was over. He could not see or hear where Voldemort was. He glimpsed another Death Eater swooping out of the way, and heard, "Avada!" As the pain from Harry's scar forced his eyes shut, his wand acted of its own accord. He felt it drag his hand around like some great magnet, saw a spurt of golden fire through his half-closed eyelids, heard a crack and a scream of fury. The remaining Death Eaters yelled. Voldemort screamed, "No!" Somehow, Harry found his nose an inch from the dragon fire button. He punched it with his wand-free hand, and the bike shot more flames in the air, hurtling straight towards the ground. "Hagrid!" Harry called, holding onto the bike for dear life. "Hagrid! Accio, Hagrid!" The motorbike sped up, sucked toward the earth. Face level with the handlebars, Harry could see nothing but distant lights growing nearer and nearer. He was going to crash, and there was nothing he could do about it. Behind him came another scream. "Your wand, Selwyn! Give me your wand!" He felt Voldemort before he saw him. Looking sideways, he stared into the red eyes and was sure they would be the last thing he ever saw. Voldemort preparing to curse him once more. And then Voldemort vanished. Harry looked down and saw Hagrid spread-eagled on the ground below him. He pulled hard at the handlebars to avoid hitting him, groped for the brake, but with an ear-splitting, ground-trembling crash, he smashed into a muddy pond. Chapter 5. Fallen Warrior. "Hagrid?" Harry struggled to raise himself out of the debris of metal and leather that surrounded him. His hands sank into inches of muddy water as he tried to stand. He could not understand where Voldemort had gone and expected him to swoop out of the darkness at any moment. Something hot and wet was trickling down his chin and from his forehead. He crawled out of the pond and stumbled toward the great dark mass on the ground that was Hagrid. "Hagrid! Hagrid, talk to me!" But the dark mass did not stir. "Who's there? Is it Potter? Are you Harry Potter?" Harry did not recognize the man's voice. Then a woman shouted, "They've crashed, Ted! Crashed in the garden!" Harry's head was swimming. "Hagrid," he repeated stupidly, and his knees buckled. The next thing he knew, he was lying on his back on what felt like cushions, with a burning sensation in his ribs and right arm. His missing tooth had been regrown. The scar on his forehead was still throbbing. "Hagrid?" He opened his eyes and saw that he was lying on a sofa in an unfamiliar lamplit sitting room. His rucksack lay on the floor a short distance away, wet and muddy. A fair-haired, big-bellied man was watching Harry anxiously. "Hagrid's fine, son," said the man. "The wife's seeing to him now. How are you feeling? Anything else broken? I fixed your ribs, your tooth, and your arm. I'm Ted, by the way. Ted Tonks, Dora's father." Harry sat up too quickly. Lights popped in front of his eyes, and he felt sick and giddy. "Voldemort, easy now," said Ted Tonks, placing a hand on Harry's shoulder and pushing him back against the cushions. "That was a nasty crash you just had. What happened, anyway? Something go wrong with the bike? Arthur Weasley outstretch himself again, him and his muggle contraptions?" "No," said Harry, as his scar pulsed like an open wound. "Death Eaters. Loads of them. We were chased." "Death Eaters?" said Ted sharply. "What do you mean, Death Eaters? I thought they didn't know you were being moved tonight. I thought—" "They knew," said Harry. Ted Tonks looked up at the ceiling as though he could see through it to the sky above. Well, we know our protective charms hold then, don't we? They shouldn't be able to get within 100 yards of the place in any direction. Now Harry understood why Voldemort had vanished. It had been at the point when the motorbike crossed the barrier of the Order's charms. He only hoped they would continue to work. He imagined Voldemort 100 yards above them as they spoke, looking for a way to penetrate what Harry visualized as a great transparent bubble. He swung his legs off the sofa. He needed to see Hagrid with his own eyes before he would believe that he was alive. He had barely stood up, however, when a door opened, and Hagrid squeezed through it, his face covered in mud and blood, limping a little, but miraculously alive. "Harry!" Knocking over 2 delicate tables and an aspidistra, he covered the floor between them in 2 strides and pulled Harry into a hug that nearly cracked his newly repaired ribs. "Blimey, Harry! How did you get out of that? I thought we were both goners." "Yeah, me too. I can't believe..." Harry broke off. He had just noticed the woman who had entered the room behind Hagrid. "You!" he shouted, and he thrust his hand into his pocket, but it was empty. "Your wand's here, son," said Ted, tapping it on Harry's arm. "It fell right beside you. I picked it up. And that's my wife you're shouting at." "Oh, I'm sorry." As she moved forward into the room, Mrs. Tonks's resemblance to her sister Bellatrix became much less pronounced. Her hair was a light, soft brown, and her eyes were wider and kinder. Nevertheless, she looked a little haughty after Harry's exclamation. "What happened to our daughter?" she asked. "Hagrid said you were ambushed. Where is Nymphadora?" "I don't know," said Harry. "We don't know what happened to anyone else." She and Ted exchanged looks. A mixture of fear and guilt gripped Harry at the sight of their expressions. If any of the others had died, it was his fault. All his fault. He had consented to the plan, given them his heir. "The portkey," he said, remembering all of a sudden. "We've got to get back to the burrow and find out. Then we'll be able to send you word. Or Tonks will, once she's..." "Dora will be okay, Dromeda," said Ted. "She knows her stuff. She's been in plenty of tight spots with the horrors. The portkey's through here," he added to Harry. It's supposed to leave in 3 minutes, if you want to take it." "Yeah, we do," said Harry. He seized his rucksack, swung it onto his shoulders. He looked at Mrs. Tonks, wanting to apologize for the state of fear in which he left her, and for which he felt so terribly responsible, but no words occurred to him that did not seem hollow and insincere. I'll tell Dora, to send word when she... Thanks for patching us up. Thanks for everything. He was glad to leave the room and follow Ted Tonks along a short hallway and into a bedroom. Hagrid came after them, bending low so to avoid hitting his head on the door lintel. "There you go, son. That's the portkey." Mr. Tonks was pointing to a small, silver-backed hairbrush lying on the dressing table. "Thanks," said Harry, reaching out to place a finger on it, ready to leave. "Wait a moment," said Hagrid, looking around. "Harry, where's Hedwig?" She got hit," said Harry. The realization crashed over him. He felt ashamed of himself as tears stung his eyes. The owl had been his companion, his one great link with the magical world whenever he had been forced to return to the Dursleys. Hagrid reached out a great hand and patted him painfully on the shoulder. "Never mind," he said gruffly. "Never mind. She had a great old life." "Hagrid!" said Ted Tonks warningly as the hairbrush glowed bright blue, and Hagrid only just got his forefinger to it in time. With a jerk behind the navel, as though an invisible hook and line had dragged him forward, Harry was pulled into nothingness, spinning uncontrollably, his finger glued to the portkey as he and Hagrid hurtled away from Mr. Tonks. Seconds later, Harry's feet slammed onto hard ground, and he fell onto his hands and knees in the yard of the burrow. He heard screams. Throwing aside the no longer glowing hairbrush, Harry stood up, swaying slightly, and saw Mrs. Weasley and Ginny running down the steps by the back door, as Hagrid, who had also collapsed on landing, clambered laboriously to his feet. "Harry, you are the real Harry! What happened? Where are the others?" cried Mrs. Weasley. "What do you mean? Isn't anyone else back?" Harry panted. The answer was clearly etched in Mrs. Weasley's pale face. "The Death Eaters were waiting for us," Harry told her. "We were surrounded the moment we took off. They knew it was tonight. I don't know what happened to anyone else. 4 of them chased us. It was all we could do to get away. And then Voldemort caught up with us." He could hear the self-justifying note in his voice, the plea for her to understand why he did not know what had happened to her sons. But, "Thank goodness you're all right," she said, pulling him into a hug he did not feel he deserved.
Haven't got any brandy, have you, Molly? Said Hagrid a little shakily. For medicinal purposes?
She could have summoned it by magic, but as she hurried back toward the crooked house, Harry knew that she wanted to hide her face. He turned to Ginny, and she answered his unspoken plea for information at once. Ron and Tonks should have been back first, but they missed their portkey. It came back without them, she said, pointing at a rusty oil can lying on the ground nearby. And that one, she pointed at an ancient sneaker, should have been Dad and Fred's. They were supposed to be second. You and Hagrid were third, and she checked her watch. If they made it, George and Lupin ought to be back in about a minute. Mrs. Weasley reappeared carrying a bottle of brandy, which she handed to Hagrid. He uncorked it and drank it straight down in one. Mum! Shouted Ginny, pointing to a spot several feet away. A blue light had appeared in the darkness. It grew larger and brighter, and Lupin and George appeared, spinning and then falling. Harry knew immediately that there was something wrong. Lupin was supporting George, who was unconscious and whose face was covered in blood. Harry ran forward and seized George's legs. Together, he and Lupin carried George into the house and through the kitchen to the sitting room, where they laid him on the sofa. As the lamplight fell across George's head, Ginny gasped, and Harry's stomach lurched. One of George's ears was missing. The side of his head and neck were drenched in wet, shockingly scarlet blood. No sooner had Mrs. Weasley bent over her son than Lupin grabbed Harry by the upper arm and dragged him none too gently back into the kitchen, where Hagrid was still attempting to ease his bulk through the back door. Oi! Said Hagrid indignantly. Let go of him! Let go of Harry! Lupin ignored him. What creature sat in the corner the first time that Harry Potter visited my office at Hogwarts? He said, giving Harry a small shake. Answer me! A Grindylow in a tank, wasn't it? Lupin released Harry and fell back against the kitchen cupboard. What was that about? Roared Hagrid. I'm sorry, Harry, but I had to check, said Lupin tersely. We've been betrayed. Voldemort knew that you were being moved tonight, and the only people who could have told him were directly involved in the plan. You might have been an imposter. So why aren't you checking me? Panted Hagrid, still struggling to fit through the door. You are half giant, said Lupin, looking up at Hagrid. The Polyjuice potion is designed for human use only. None of the Order would have told Voldemort we were moving tonight, said Harry. The idea was dreadful to him. He could not believe it of any of them. Voldemort only caught up with me toward the end. He didn't know which one I was in the beginning. If he'd been in on the plan, he'd have known from the start I was the one with Hagrid. Voldemort caught up with you? Said Lupin sharply. What happened? How did you escape? Harry explained briefly how the Death Eaters pursuing them had seemed to recognize him as the true Harry, how they had abandoned the chase, how they must have summoned Voldemort, who had appeared just before he and Hagrid had reached the sanctuary of Tonks's parents. They recognized you. But how? What had you done? Harry tried to remember. The whole journey seemed like a blur of panic and confusion. I saw Stan Shunpike. You know the bloke who was the conductor on the night bus? And I tried to disarm him instead of... Well, he doesn't know what he's doing, does he? He must be Imperious. Lupin looked aghast. Harry, the time for disarming is past. These people are trying to capture and kill you. At least stun if you aren't prepared to kill. We were hundreds of feet up. Stan's not himself. And if I stunned him and he'd fallen, he'd have died the same as if I'd used Avada Kedavra. Expelliarmus saved me from Voldemort 2 years ago, Harry added defiantly. Lupin was reminding him of the sneering Hufflepuff Zacharias Smith, who had jeered at Harry for wanting to teach Dumbledore's army how to disarm. Yes, Harry, said Lupin with painful restraint, and a great number of Death Eaters witnessed that happening. Forgive me, but it was a very unusual move then, under imminent threat of death. Repeating it tonight in front of Death Eaters, who either witnessed or heard about the first occasion, was close to suicidal. So you think I should have killed Stan Shunpike? Said Harry angrily. Of course not, said Lupin. But the Death Eaters, frankly most people, would have expected you to attack back. Expelliarmus is a useful spell, Harry, but the Death Eaters seem to think it is your signature move, and I urge you not to let it become so. Lupin was making Harry feel idiotic, and yet there was still a grain of defiance inside him. I won't blast people out of my way just because they're there, said Harry. That's Voldemort's job. Lupin's retort was lost. Finally succeeding in squeezing through the door, Hagrid staggered to a chair and sat down. It collapsed beneath him. Ignoring his mingled oaths and apologies, Harry addressed Lupin once again. Will George be okay? All Lupin's frustration with Harry seemed to drain away at the question. I think so. Although there's no chance of replacing his ear. Not when it's been cursed off. There was a scuffling from outside. Lupin dived for the back door. Harry leapt over Hagrid's legs and sprinted into the yard. Two figures had appeared in the yard, and as Harry ran toward them, he realized they were Hermione, now returning to her normal appearance, and Kingsley, both clutching a bent coat hanger. Hermione flung herself into Harry's arms, but Kingsley showed no pleasure at the sight of any of them. Over Hermione's shoulder, Harry saw him raise his wand and pointed at Lupin's chest.
"The last words Albus Dumbledore spoke to the pair of us."
"Harry is the best hope we have. Trust him," said Lupin calmly. Kingsley turned his wand on Harry, but Lupin said, "It's him. I've checked."
All right,
said Kingsley, stowing his wand back beneath his cloak.
"But somebody betrayed us. They knew it was tonight."
"So it seems," replied Lupin, "but apparently they did not realize that there would be 7 Harrys."
"Small comfort," snarled Kingsley. "Who else is back?"
"Only Harry, Hagrid, George, and me." Hermione stifled a little moan behind her hand. "What happened to you?" Lupin asked Kingsley.
"Followed by 5. Injured 2. Might have killed 1. Kingsley reeled off. "And we saw you-know-who as well. He joined the chase halfway through, but vanished pretty quickly. Remus, he can
fly," supplied Harry. "I saw him too. He came after Hagrid and me."
"So that's why he left, to follow you," said Kingsley. "I couldn't understand why he'd vanished, but what made him change targets?"
"Harry behaved a little too kindly to Stan Shunpike," said Lupin. "Stan?" repeated Hermione. "But I thought he was in Azkaban." Kingsley let out a mirthless laugh.
"Hermione, there's obviously been a mass breakout, which the Ministry has hushed up. Travers's hood fell off when I cursed him. He's supposed to be inside too. But what happened to you, Remus? Where's George?"
"He lost an ear," said Lupin. "Lost an?" repeated Hermione in a high voice. "Snape's work," said Lupin. "Snape?" shouted Harry. "You didn't say—" "He lost his hood during the chase. Sectum Sempra was always a specialty of Snape's. I wish I could say I'd paid him back in kind, but it was all I could do to keep George on the broom after he was injured. He was losing so much blood." Silence fell between the 4 of them as they looked up at the sky. There was no sign of movement. The stars stared back unblinking, indifferent, unobscured by flying friends. Where was Ron? Where were Fred and Mr. Weasley? Where were Bill, Fleur, Tonks, Mad-Eye, and Mundungus?
"Harry, give us a hand,"
called Hagrid hoarsely from the door in which he was stuck again. Glad of something to do, Harry pulled him free, then headed through the empty kitchen and back into the sitting room where Mrs. Weasley and Ginny were still tending to George. Mrs. Weasley had staunched his bleeding now, and by the lamplight Harry saw a clean, gaping hole where George's ear had been. "How is he?" Mrs. Weasley looked around and said, "I can't make it go back. Not when it's been removed by dark magic. But it could have been so much worse. He's alive." "Yeah," said Harry. "Thank God." "Did I hear someone else in the yard?" Ginny asked. "Hermione and Kingsley," said Harry. "Thank goodness," Ginny whispered. They looked at each other. Harry wanted to hug her, hold on to her. He did not even care much that Mrs. Weasley was there, but before he could act on that impulse, there was a great crash from the kitchen.
"I'll prove who I am, Kingsley, after I've seen my son. Now back off if you know what's good for you."
Harry had never heard Mr. Weasley shout like that before. He burst into the living room, his bald patch gleaming with sweat, his spectacles askew, Fred right behind him, both pale but uninjured. "Arthur!" sobbed Mrs. Weasley. "Oh, thank goodness!" "How is he?" Mr. Weasley dropped to his knees beside George. For the first time since Harry had known him, Fred seemed to be at a loss for words. He gaped over the back of the sofa at his twin's wound, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Perhaps roused by the sound of Fred's and their father's arrival, George stirred. "How do you feel, Georgie?" whispered Mrs. Weasley. George's fingers groped for the side of his head. "Saint-like," he murmured. "What's wrong with him?" croaked Fred, looking terrified. "Is his mind affected?" "Saint-like," repeated George, opening his eyes and looking up at his brother. "You see, I'm holy. Holy. Fred, get it?" Mrs. Weasley sobbed harder than ever. Color flooded Fred's pale face. "Pathetic," he told George. "Pathetic! With the whole wide world of ear-related humor before you, you go for holy?" "Ah, well," said George, grinning at his tear-soaked mother. "You'll be able to tell us apart now anyway, Mom." He looked around. "Hi, Harry." "You are Harry, right?" "Yeah, I am," said Harry, moving closer to the sofa. "Well, at least we got you back okay," said George. "Why aren't Ron and Bill huddled around my sick bed?" "They're not back yet, George," said Mrs. Weasley. George's grin faded. Harry glanced at Ginny and motioned her to accompany him back outside. As they walked through the kitchen, she said in a low voice, Ron and Tonks should be back by now. They didn't have a long journey. Auntie Muriel's not that far from here. Harry said nothing. He had been trying to keep fear at bay ever since reaching the burrow, but now it enveloped him, seeming to crawl over his skin, throbbing in his chest, clogging his throat. As they walked back down the steps into the dark yard, Ginny took his hand. Kingsley was striding backward and forward, glancing up at the sky, every time he turned. Harry was reminded of Uncle Vernon, pacing the living room 1,000,000 years ago. Hagrid, Hermione, and Lupin stood shoulder to shoulder, gazing upward in silence. None of them looked around when Harry and Ginny joined their silent vigil. The minutes stretched into what might as well have been years. The slightest breath of wind made them all jump and turn toward the whispering bush or tree in the hope that one of the missing Order members might leap unscathed from its leaves. And then a broom materialized directly above them and streaked toward the ground. "It's them!" screamed Hermione. Tonks landed in a long skid that sent earth and pebbles everywhere. "Remus!" Tonks cried as she staggered off the broom into Lupin's arms. Her face was set and white. He seemed unable to speak. Ron tripped dazedly toward Harry and Hermione. "You're okay," he mumbled before Hermione flew at him and hugged him tightly. I thought... "All right," said Ron, patting her on the back. "I'm fine." "Ron was great," said Tonks warmly, relinquishing her hold on Lupin. "Wonderful! Stun one of the Death Eaters straight to the head. And when you're aiming at a moving target from a flying broom..." "You did?" said Hermione, gazing up at Ron with her arms still around his neck. "Always the tone of surprise," gazing up at he said a little grumpily, breaking free. "Are we the last back?" "No," said Ginny. "We're still waiting for Bill and Fleur and Mad-Eye and Mundungus. I'm going to tell Mom and Dad you're okay, Ron." She ran back inside. "So, what kept you? What happened?" Lupin sounded almost angry at Tonks. "Bellatrix," said Tonks. "She wants me quite as much as she wants Harry, Remus. She tried very hard to kill me. I just wish I'd got her. I owe Bellatrix. But we definitely injured Rodolphus. Then we got to Ron's Auntie Muriel's and we missed our port key and she was fussing over us." A muscle was jumping in Lupin's jaw. He nodded but seemed unable to say anything else. "So what happened to you lot?" Tonks asked, returning to Harry, Hermione, and Kingsley. They recounted the stories of their own journeys, but all the time the continued absence of Bill, Fleur, Mad-Eye, and Mundungus seemed to lie upon them like a frost, its icy bite harder and harder to ignore. "I'm going to have to get back to Downing Street. I should have been there an hour ago," said Kingsley finally, after a last sweeping gaze at the sky. "Let me know when they're back." Lupin nodded. With a wave to the others, Kingsley walked away into the darkness toward the gate. Harry thought he heard the faintest pop as Kingsley disapparated just beyond the burrow's boundaries. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley came racing down the back steps, Ginny behind them. Both parents hugged Ron before turning to Lupin and Tonks. "Thank you," said Mrs. Weasley, "for our sons." "Don't be silly, Molly," said Tonks at once. "How's George?" "What's wrong with him?" piped up Ron. "He's lost..." But the end of Mrs. Weasley's sentence was drowned in a general outcry. A thestral had just soared into sight and landed a few feet from them. Bill and Fleur slid from its back, windswept but unhurt. "Bill! Thank God! Thank God!" Mrs. Weasley ran forward, but the hug Bill bestowed upon her was perfunctory. Looking directly at his father, he said, "Mad-Eye's dead." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Harry felt as though something inside him was falling through the earth, leaving him forever. "We saw it," said Bill. Fleur nodded, tear tracks glittering on her cheeks in the light from the kitchen window. "It happened just after we broke out of the circle. Mad-Eye and Dung were close by. They were heading north too. Voldemort, he can fly, went straight for them. Dung panicked, I heard him cry out. Mad-Eye tried to stop him, but he disapparated. Voldemort's curse hit Mad-Eye full in the face. He fell backward off his broom, and there was nothing we could do. Nothing. We had half a dozen them on our own tail." Bill's voice broke. "Of course you couldn't have done anything," said Lupin. They all stood looking at each other. Harry could not quite comprehend it. Mad-Eye. Dead. It could not be. Mad-Eye, so tough, so brave, the consummate survivor. At last it seemed to dawn on everyone, though nobody said it, that there was no point waiting in the yard anymore. and in silence they followed Mr. and Mrs. Weasley back into the burrow and into the living room where Fred and George were laughing together. "What's wrong?" said Fred, scanning their faces as they entered. "What's happened? Who's—" "Mad-Eye," said Mr. Weasley. "Dead." The twins' grins turned to grimaces of shock. Nobody seemed to know what to do. Tonks was crying silently into a handkerchief. She had been close to Mad-Eye. Harry knew his favorite and his protege at the Ministry of Magic. Hagrid, who had sat down on the floor in the corner where he had most space, was dabbing at his eyes with his tablecloth-sized handkerchief. Bill walked over to the sideboard and pulled out a bottle of fire whiskey and some glasses. "Here," he said, and with a wave of his wand he sent 12 full glasses soaring through the room to each of them, holding the 13th aloft. "Mad-Eye." "Mad-Eye," they all said and drank.
"Mad-Eye,"
echoed Hagrid, a little late with a hiccup. The fire whiskey seared Harry's throat. It seemed to burn feeling back into him, dispelling the numbness and sense of unreality, firing him with something that was like courage. "So, Mundungus disappeared?" said Lupin, who had drained his own glass in one. The atmosphere changed at once. Everybody looked tense, watching Lupin, both wanting him to go on, it seemed to Harry, and slightly afraid of what they might hear. "I know what you're thinking," said Bill. "And I wondered that too. On the way back here, because they seemed to be expecting us, didn't they? But Mundungus can't have betrayed us. They didn't know there would be 7 Harrys. That confused them the moment we appeared. And in case you've forgotten, it was Mundungus who suggested that little bit of skullduggery. We wouldn't have had... Why wouldn't he have told them the essential point? No, I think Dung panicked. It's as simple as that. He didn't want to come in the first place, but Mad-Eye made him. And you know who went straight for them. It was enough to make anyone panic." "You know who acted exactly as Mad-Eye expected him to," sniffed Tonks. "Mad-Eye said he'd expect the real Harry to be with the toughest, most skilled Aurors. He chased Mad-Eye first. And when Mundungus gave them away, he switched to Kingsley." "Yes, that is all very good," snapped Fleur. "But still it does not explain how they knew we were moving Harry tonight, does it? Somebody must have been careless. Somebody let slip the date to an outsider. It is the only explanation for them knowing the date, but not the whole plan." She glared around at them all, tear tracks still etched on her beautiful face, silently daring any of them to contradict her. Nobody did. The only sound to break the silence was that of Hagrid hiccuping from behind his handkerchief. Harry glanced at Hagrid, who had just risked his own life to save Harry's. Hagrid, whom he loved, whom he trusted, whom had once been tricked into giving Voldemort crucial information in exchange for a dragon's egg. "No," Harry said aloud, and they all looked at him surprised. The fire whiskey seemed to have amplified his voice. "I mean, if somebody made a mistake," Harry went on, "and let something slip, I know they didn't mean to do it. It's not their fault," he repeated, again a little louder than he would have usually spoken. "We've got to trust each other. I trust all of you. I don't think anyone in this room would ever sell me to Voldemort." More silence followed his words. They were all looking at him. Harry felt a little hot again and drank some more fire whiskey for something to do. As he drank, he thought of Mad-Eye. Mad-Eye had always been scathing about Dumbledore's willingness to trust people. "Well said, Harry," said Fred unexpectedly. "Yeah, ear," said George with a half glance at Fred, the corner of whose mouth twitched. Lupin was wearing an odd expression as he looked at Harry. It was close to pitying. "You think I'm a fool?" demanded Harry. "No, I think you're like James," said Lupin, who would have regarded it as the height of dishonor to mistrust his friends. Harry knew what Lupin was getting at, that his father had been betrayed by his friend, Peter Pettigrew. He felt irrationally angry. He wanted to argue, but Lupin had turned away from him, set down his glass upon a side table, and addressed Bill. "There's work to do. I can ask Kingsley whether—" "No," said Bill at once. "I'll do it. I'll come." "Where are you going?" said Tonks and Fleur together. "Mad-Eye's body," said Lupin. "We need to recover it." "Can't it—" began Mrs. Weasley with an appealing look at Bill. "Wait," said Bill. "Not unless you'd rather the Death Eaters took it." Nobody spoke. Lupin and Bill said goodbye and left. The rest of them now dropped into chairs, all except for Harry, who remained standing. The suddenness and completeness of death was with them like a presence. "I've got to go too," said Harry. 10 pairs of startled eyes looked at him. "Don't be silly, Harry," said Mrs. Weasley. "What are you talking about?" "I can't stay here. He rubbed his forehead. It was prickling again. It had not hurt like this for more than a year. You're all in danger while I'm here. I don't want...
Don't be so silly, said Mrs. Weasley. The whole point of tonight was to get you here safely, and thank goodness it worked. And Fleur's agreed to get married here rather than in France. We've arranged everything so we can all stay together and look after you.
She did not understand. She was making him feel worse, not better.
If Voldemort finds out I'm here, but why should he? Asked Mrs. Weasley.
There are a dozen places you might be now, Harry, said Mr. Weasley.
He's got no way of knowing which safe house you're in. It's not me I'm worried for, said Harry.
We know that, said Mr. Weasley quietly, but it would make our efforts tonight seem rather pointless if you left.
You're not going anywhere, growled Hagrid. Blimey, Harry, after all we went through to get you here.
Yeah, what about my bleeding ear? Said George, hoisting himself up on his cushions. I know that I wouldn't want...
I know!
Harry bellowed. He felt beleaguered and blackmailed. Did they think he did not know what they had done for him? Didn't they understand that it was for precisely that reason that he wanted to go now, before they had to suffer any more on his behalf? There was a long and awkward silence in which his scar continued to prickle and throb, and which was broken at last by Mrs. Weasley.
Where's Hedwig, Harry? She said coaxingly. We can put her up with Pigwidge and give her something to eat.
His insides clenched like a fist. He could not tell her the truth. He drank the last of his fire whiskey to avoid answering.
Wait till it gets out you did it again, Harry, said Hagrid. Escaped him. Fought him off when he was right on top of you.
It wasn't me, said Harry flatly. It was my wand. My wand acted of its own accord. After a few moments, Hermione said gently,
But that's impossible, Harry. You mean that you did magic without meaning to? You reacted instinctively.
No, said Harry. The bike was falling. I couldn't have told you where Voldemort was, but my wand spun in my hand and found him and shot a spell at him. And it wasn't even a spell I recognized. I've never made gold flames appear before. Often, said Mr. Weasley, when you're in a pressured situation, you can produce magic you never dreamed of. Small children often find before they're trained.
It wasn't like that, said Harry through gritted teeth.
His scar was burning. He felt angry and frustrated. He hated the idea that they were all imagining him to have power to match Voldemort's. No one said anything. He knew that they did not believe him. Now that he came to think of it, he had never heard of a wand performing magic on its own before. His scar seared with pain. It was all he could do to not moan aloud. Muttering about fresh air, he set down his glass and left the room. As he crossed the dark yard, the great skeletal thestral looked up, rustling its enormous bat-like wings, then resumed its grazing. Harry stopped at the gate into the garden, staring out at its overgrown plants, rubbing his pounding forehead, and thinking of Dumbledore. Dumbledore would have believed him. He knew it. Dumbledore would have known how and why Harry's wand had acted independently, because Dumbledore always had the answers. He had known about wands. He had explained to Harry about the strange connection that existed between his wand and Voldemort's. But Dumbledore, like Mad-Eye, like Sirius, like his parents, like his poor owl, all were gone where Harry could never talk to them again. He felt a burning in his throat that had nothing to do with fire whiskey. And then out of nowhere, the pain in his scars peaked. As he clutched his forehead and closed his eyes, a voice screamed inside his head.
You told me the problem would be solved by using another wand!
And into his mind burst the vision of an emaciated old man lying in rags upon a stone floor, screaming, a horrible drawn-out scream, a scream of unendurable agony.
No, I beg you, I beg you! You lied to Lord Voldemort, Ollivander!
I did not, I swear I did not.
You sought to help Potter to escape him from me.
I swear I did not. I believed a different wand would work.
Explain then what happened. Lucius's wand is destroyed.
I cannot understand. The connection exists only between your two wands.
Lies!
Please, I beg you. And Harry saw the white hand raise its wand and felt Voldemort's surge of vicious anger. Saw the frail old man on the floor writhe in agony. Harry? It was over quite as quickly as it had come. Harry stood shaking in the darkness, clutching the gate into the garden, his heart racing, his scar tingling. It was several moments before he realized that Ron and Hermione were at his side. Harry, come back into the house, Hermione whispered. You aren't still thinking of leaving? Yeah, you've got to stay, mate, said Ron, thumping Harry on the back. Are you all right? Hermione asked, close enough now to look into Harry's face. You look awful. Well, said Harry shakily, I probably look better than Ollivander. When he had finished telling them what he had seen, Ron looked appalled, but Hermione downright terrified.
But it was supposed to have stopped. Your scar. It wasn't supposed to do this anymore. You mustn't let that connection open up again. Dumbledore wanted you to close your mind.
When he did not reply, she gripped his arm.
Harry, he's taking over the Ministry and the newspapers and half the Wizarding world. Don't let him inside your head, too.